The ANC's fourth National Policy Conference got underway in Gallagher Estate, Johannesburg, yesterday, the 26th of June, and some 3,500 delegates comprising the ANC's provincial structures, the branches of the ANC across all 9 provinces, the ANC Youth League, Women's League, the Military Veterans Association, as well as the ANC's alliance partners in the Communist Party of South Africa, as well as the South African trade union movement through COSATU, was represented at the conference. The conference was officially opened by President Jacob Zuma, and I think it's clear from his opening address that he tried to set the tone for what he expected the conference to deliberate on and what he hoped would be outcomes for the ANC to show in the build up to the ANC's all important elective conference in Mangaung in December, when they will elect the next leader and president of the ANC. The president's address, there's been mixed reactions to it from different quarters, from analysts, from media, and even within the ANC and the ruling alliance, and also mixed reactions from business. I think what's important is that the president tried to reflect on the historic role the ANC has played in South Africa's liberation, in setting the tone of what was expected of delegates, in formulating policy proposals that would allow the ANC to enter into the next phase in governing the country if it is elected back into office. And the president was very clear in saying these are the areas in which government under the leadership of the ANC has succeeded, and this is why we've succeeded. But in making the transition to democracy and the negotiated settlements that were made with the previous nationalist government, that there were certain concessions that had to be made under the sunset clauses, and that created certain limitations that came with the burden of incumbency. At the same time, the president said that whilst in many instances the ANC had developed good policies, it's not always been effective in implementing the policies, and so as a result of the systemic challenges posed by apartheid and some of the failures within government itself under the ANC has not delivered on all of what it had hoped to, and there are certain pervasive challenges that prevail, what he refers to and what government and the ANC has now commonly referred to as the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And so he set the tone by really saying that it is expected of cadres of the ANC to approach policy of the ANC and policy discussions of the ANC with this kind of historical context in mind, but also with the future of the ANC in mind. And how does the ANC prepare itself for that kind of future from the current term of the last 18 years of governing the country into a new future, and what has now become known as the second transition of the ANC. And he went into some lengths in trying to unpack what he saw as the second transition of the ANC within the context in which the second transition policy discussion document on strategy and tactics had been formulated by the ANC. And he touched on a number of areas, and the most significant of those is that he said the ANC and government under the ANC would have to make a giant leap forward and a radical shift in addressing the socio-economic transformation of South African society in order to address the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And it's not quite clear what this radical shift is constituted of, what this giant leap needs to be, but the president spoke of a number of things. He spoke of strong state intervention, something which has become common under the leadership of the ANC over the last few years. But he stopped short of talking about outright nationalization and a decision on that, saying that those would have to be policy discussions. And the debate has to move from just nationalization narrowly as it has been defined and spoken about, but into broader topics of how the inequality in the economic structure of South Africa, the ownership of resources, and where production occurs and industrialization occurs, happens, and who controls that and who has ownership to it. He spoke extensively about what is expected of ANC cadres. He spoke about cadership and what cadership represented historically in the ANC and what it's supposed to represent now and for the ANC in the future in the context of the triple challenges and this giant leap that he spoke about. And so he spoke about addressing the failures of the ANC and the failures of government in areas like corruption, like fraud, like maladministration, like administrative inefficiencies, like implementation failure and policy failure. And he said that it's within that context that the deliberations on policy of the ANC needs to pay attention to what the ANC does to create the kind of cadreship and hold accountable the kind of cadreship that represents the party within itself and also within government. So he was quite strong. I think he was putting the challenge to the delegates. He sort of was setting the tone as well. And it's going to be interesting to see how people respond, whether they warm up to this kind of approach by the president in terms of what he sees as being the role of cadres, or whether it will alienate them from him as possible supporters in the build-up to the Mangaung elective conference. But I think what we can say is that the president tried to show a strong hand. He tried to show that he is in control of the party, that he, as the president, speaking on behalf of the entire National Executive Committee of the party, has a particular view of how the party must approach its policy deliberations and a particular approach of the kind of cadreship that must implement those policies. But there's clearly a lot of detail that's still needing to be elaborated on, and so it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 3 days. Day one yesterday was dominated by discussions into the 13 commissions that align with the 13 policy areas that are under discussion of the ANC. The president and the deputy president and members of the National Executive Committee themselves are going to be participating in these discussions. And so it's going to be very interesting to see the extent to which the key areas the president put emphasis on in his opening address have been heeded by delegates and whether they will actually take issue with them or not. The president later in the afternoon, together with the Deputy Secretary General and ANC spokespeople, briefed the media on his address, and he was very unapologetic in his address about the inability of government under the ANC to address the legacies of apartheid. And it does beg the question around the distinction between not taking responsibility for legacies that historically have existed by previous governments and the difference between an acknowledgement of the need to address those legacies in the present day and in the future, and the role of the ANC in that, in so much as it's not the creator of those situations. So he was very unapologetic about it, and he defended the notion of the second transition and what it's required to do. So clearly the second transition in terms of policy discussions around tactics and strategy broadly is what's driving the ANC's policy deliberations and what the president would like to see delegates take into account when they're looking at particular topics in the policy discussions, whether it's on economic transformation or land reform. He wants it to be driven by this notion of the second transition and what then is required within each of the key policy areas. So interesting discussions over the next 3 days. Day 2 will get underway tomorrow, and it will be dominated by commissions again, and it should be useful and even possible to be able to see what is emerging, what is the sentiment and the mood on the ground amongst delegates, and what are pundits and analysts having to say about it. And it's clearly a big issue which the country is watching and the international community is watching. So yes, from me here at the ANC Policy Conference, it's over and out, and I hope you found this brief useful. Thank you.